In this video, I'm going to show you how I transformed these 2 bags of fiber and a handful of bugs into this beautiful hand knit shawl. The first bag of fiber is filled with 8 ounces of wool that I purchased at the Rhinebeck Sheep and Wool Festival back in 2021. This wool comes from Elihu Farms in Valley Falls, New York, and it was shorn off of a Romney sheep. These gorgeous locks have only been washed so far, so they still need quite a bit of processing before they can actually become yarn. My second bag of fiber is also a purchase from Rhinebeck 2021, and it's nearly 4 ounces of angora rabbit fiber from the Rosefield farm. Angora rabbits naturally shed their coats and need to be brushed to keep them in good health, which is called plucking, which sounds like a really harsh term, but it's actually a really gentle and humane process. I've never actually spun angora fiber before, but when I was at the festival and I saw that this rabbit's name was also Andrea, I knew I had to give it a go. And I thought these 2 fibers might blend really nicely together to make one giant, super cozy skein of yarn. So to prepare these fibers for spinning, I'm gonna use my Louet classic drum carder. And I'm gonna card the sheep's wool on its own first, since there are still intact curls and locks that need to be opened up before I can start blending things. So I'm just taking bits of fiber in my hands and I'm just fluffing them up a little bit before putting them through the drum carder. I just wanted to mention real quick that I'm still pretty new at carding and spinning, so please don't consider this a tutorial video. I'm just taking you along with me on this journey of learning and experimenting and growing, just so we can experience the whole process together. Oh, also, this is totally random, but while I was working on this project, I decided to start listening to Harry Potter on audiobook. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but I've never actually read a single Harry Potter book in my life, and I always felt like that was a part of pop culture that I just completely missed out on. Ryan also never read the series, so we decided to make this like a little book club for the 2 of us, and we both absolutely love it. So for this whole video, while I'm doing all of this tedious fiber prep, I had my earbuds in and I was mentally at Hogwarts having a blast, and it was a joy. Anyway, back to the project. To make things easier for myself and for my drum carder, before carding this wool, I used a scale and I divided the wool into 3 even amounts and then processed each third separately, which gave me these 3 beautiful bats. I then divided the angora fiber into 3 even piles and will continue to process these as 3 separate bats that will each end up being roughly 60% wool, 40% angora fiber. To blend these fibers as evenly as possible, I first grabbed a little bit of the wool bat, fluffed it up a bit in my hands, and then carded it. Then I grabbed a pinch of the angora fiber, fluffed it up a little bit in my hands, and carded it. And I just kept alternating like this until I was all out of fiber. After removing the bat from the drum carder, I decided that I wanted to blend things just one more time to get the fibers distributed as evenly as possible. Then, finally, after hours and hours of drum carding, I had these 3 beautiful bats. And then it was time to spin all of this fluffy goodness into yarn. I divided my bats into 2 even piles, spun each pile onto a bobbin using my default spinning method, and then plied them together to make a 2-ply yarn. I know there are a lot of spinners out there that are very precise and calculated when they spin, who take their time to make a precise plan, measure out their twist, check their yarn for consistency, etc. But at this point in my spinning journey, I'm not really concerned about making things super perfect. I think about spinning yarn very similarly to how I think about my weaving practice. I'm just here to have a fun time, to enjoy the process and enjoy the feeling of fiber in my hands, and whatever the outcome ends up being, I'll be stoked about it. And here's how my giant skein turned out. I ended up with about 350 yards of this super squishy yarn, which is mostly in the worsted to chunky weight range. Then I mordanted my yarn, which is a necessary step to ensure that the natural dye colors will be super bright and will stick around for a long time. I used alum, which I measured at 20% of the weight of my fiber, dissolved it in hot water, and then added it to my large dye pot. Then I submerged my yarn, brought it to a simmer, and left it to do its thing for about 45 minutes. And while that was cooking, I prepared my cochineal dye. Cochineal is a teeny tiny insect native to the Americas that lives on cacti. These bugs naturally produce carminic acid to deter predation by other insects. But this acid can also be extracted to make carmine dye. These bugs have been used for dyeing as early as the 2nd century BC and are still very much in use today to dye fabrics, cosmetics, and as food coloring because they're natural, non-toxic, and produce a vivid, long-lasting dye. I got both my packet of bugs and my dyeing instructions from The Spinnery, a yarn shop in New Jersey, and I'll put a link to their store and all the other materials that I'm using in this video's description. First, I soaked the dried bugs in some warm tap water for about 45 minutes to rehydrate them. Then I transferred them to a teeny tiny dye pot, brought them to a boil, and let them cook for about 15 minutes. I strained the dye liquid and then ended up actually returning the bugs to the heat to try to get as much color out of them as possible. And then I added some more tap water to my main dye pot. I repeated this process, so in total I boiled and strained the bugs about 3 times. This red color is so beautiful. I then submerged my mordanted hand-spun yarn and then brought this dye bath to a simmer and let it sit for about an hour and a half, stirring occasionally. I definitely felt like a witch stirring my magical potion in Professor Snape's class. Then an interesting thing happened. The dye started off a super deep red color, and after about an hour, it suddenly turned bright purple, which was a total surprise. I didn't add anything extra at all, but I did read online that adding iron to a cochineal bath will shift it purple, so I'm just assuming that my Manhattan water supply has quite a bit of iron in it. I'm actually super happy because I think this shade of purple is just so dang pretty. After sitting on the heat for a full hour and a half, I removed the yarn from the dye pot, let it cool a bit, and then rinsed it with water that was the same temperature as the yarn just to prevent felting. But then I had all this dye left and it was still so deep and so saturated and so pretty, I felt really bad throwing it out. So I started to look through my apartment to find other protein fiber things to dye. And I found this 100% cashmere sweater that I absolutely love the style of, but I'm always so nervous to wear it because it's pure white. So I just tossed it into the dye bath, let it sit on the heat at a simmer for about an hour, then turned off the heat and left it to sit in the dye bath and cool overnight. And here's how the yarn turned out. I am absolutely in love with this color. I then left this yarn to dry overnight and spent the evening browsing Ravelry for the perfect knitting pattern, so the next day when the yarn was totally dry, I could immediately start knitting. But first, I had to wind the yarn into a giant cake using my Swift and ball winder. I knit a few swatches and I found that I really liked the look of this yarn on a US 10.5 knitting needle. My goal was to have stitches that are loose enough so this fairly thick yarn will still make a fabric with some drape and movement. And then I started knitting. The pattern I'm using is called the Quaker Yarn Stretcher Boomerang by Susan Ashcroft. I picked this pattern specifically because it was designed for stretching limited amounts of handspun into a fun and wearable item. I also really liked that it featured really simple alternating rows of garter and stockinette stitches, which I thought would show off the character of my handspun yarn pretty nicely. As I knit, I finished the first Harry Potter book and I started the second, and I was also kept company by my very demanding but very loving cat. Also, the dye stained my hands pretty badly, which is totally my own fault for not rinsing the yarn well enough. After a few more days of audiobooks and knitting, the shawl was finally done. I rinsed it several more times until the water ran clear, and then I pinned it onto my blocking mats and let it dry for a few days. And here's how the finished shawl turned out. Without sounding too cheesy, this whole process truly felt like magic. This was my first time ever taking on a project like this where I had a hand in nearly every single step of the process, from fleece to finished shawl, and I love how it turned out. Also, I'm super happy with how my cashmere sweater turned out too. Thank you so much for joining me on this giant carding, spinning, dyeing, and knitting adventure. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button to help support my channel. And I will see you in my next adventure. Bye!